My name is Manjari Mahajan. I'm co-director of the India-China Institute. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to each of you to the Institute's 20th anniversary symposium. I know it's a gorgeous spring evening in New York City, so we really appreciate your coming to a basement room for serious conversations. I have two tasks this evening. First, to briefly explain our thinking as we were organizing the symposium. And second, it will be my privilege to introduce the new school president, Joel Tars, who will speak immediately after me. So when we were contemplating this 20th year anniversary, and this was well before the Trump administration came to power, we were deeply aware of the vastly different circumstances between 2004, when the Institute was founded, and the current political moment. The India-China Institute was created under the leadership of Arjuna Padurai, who was the provost of the New School at that time, and Benjamin Lee, who was then the dean of NSSR. It was a time of enormous optimism about globalization, of economic flows, of exchanges of ideas, technology, and people that were understood to be reshaping the world through their movements. And the argument was that such a globalizing world required analysis that was different from the approach of traditional area studies that had been common in US universities at that time, area studies which tended to provide deep scholarship into cultures, languages of specific regions, and which focused on bounded civilizations and national interests. The India-China Institute was conceived as an explicitly different kind of endeavor, an endeavor that would pursue innovative ways of thinking about regions by studying connections and flows, and by recognizing the fluidity and porousness of capital, cultures, and borders. At that time, I should note that the domestic milieu of each country was hospitable to this kind of work. China was growing at an unprecedented rate. India was on the rise. Both countries were marked not only by robust economic growth, but also relatively open, noisy, cacophonous public spheres, universities, social movements, and media. Both countries were considered leaders of the so-called developing world, and in fact often acted in concert in multilateral forums, whether it be on topics of intellectual property, trade, or climate change. So it was in this context that ICI was formed. Its initial signature programming included a series of fellows cohorts, which brought together scholars and practitioners from India, China, and the United States around particular research themes. These cohorts of fellows conducted research, often together, they traveled together, they built long-standing collaborations and conversations, and in effect built an understanding of a common shared world. In many ways, this programming instantiated the Institute's founding commitment to studying a globalizing world by following flows of people and ideas. And now here we are 20 years later. In a dramatically different world that is marked by a range of crises around foundational structures and institutions that we have perhaps long taken for granted. As you know, there's disenchantment around globalization and free markets, with older promises of political liberalism and multilateralism and their ability to deliver a more equitable world. There's skepticism of expertise and knowledge production, especially as it takes place within elite institutions of universities. Domestically, very strikingly for me, since I'm from India, but also in China, compared to 20 years ago, there is significant intolerance of dissent, a normalization of self-censorship, shrinking space for civil society actors that are not aligned with a central agenda, systematic attack and erosion of institutions that used to serve as repositories of diversity of discourses. And of course, in the last 3 months, the Trump administration has made it clear that the United States does not want to be left out and left behind and is keen to join this trend. So this broad shift was actually vividly illustrated in ICI's most recent Fellows Program, which was on the theme of politics of expertise and knowledge production in policymaking. The conclusion of the 11 empirical studies that will be published this June in a special volume by Amsterdam University Press was that the conclusion was that both India and China face a profound challenge of how to build and sustain ecosystems of experts that are not simply echo chambers of the political executive. What was also striking about this fellows program was that this program, in the wake of the pandemic, most of the meetings took place largely on Zoom. But then when we did try to meet in person, it became very quickly apparent that for reasons of visas, security laws, institutional permissions, pandemic restrictions, neither India nor China nor the United States would be convenient places to gather in. In the end, our in-person meeting took place at the National University of Singapore. So as we address this period of unraveling of older norms, alliances, institutions, what becomes our charge for this meeting? We are hoping that we can think collectively about some common questions. First, how did we get here? And especially, what do the vantage points of India and China offer for understanding our current challenges? Are there lessons that we can draw for the United States, for global politics writ large, if we think with the histories of India and China? But we also want to take this meeting to look ahead. What kinds of new alliances and arrangements do we see emerging? Can we reflect on alternative futures, especially with an understanding of how the world is viewed by and has been shaped by these Asian actors? Okay, let me turn to my second task. We are extremely honored today to have with us the president of the New School, Joel Tars. He's also the University Professor of Architecture and Sustainable Design at the university. In a happy coincidence, I learned that President Tars joined the New School in the same year as ICI's inception, so both the Institute and he share a 20th anniversary. And indeed, I believe he served as a highly valued advisor in the early years of ICI. An architect by training, President Tars has focused on sustainability, resilience, and the development of policy and design-based solutions to climate change and the construction of healthy environments. He joined Parsons in 2004 as a member of the full-time faculty and the first director of sustainable design and urban ecology. In 2006, he founded the New School's Tishman Environment and Design Center, which fosters the integration of design, policy, and social justice approaches to environmental issues. In 2009, he was appointed the executive dean of Parsons School of Design, where he served as the head of college for a decade. Under his leadership, Parsons consistently ranked as the top school for art and design in the United States, a position it continues to hold today. Before coming to the New School, President Tars had a career in 2 different architecture firms where he directed a number of award-winning projects. He also served as the co-chair of the New York City panel on climate change. We are very honored to have him at the symposium. Joel.
Entirely up to me whether I stand or sit. Thank you, Manjari. I appreciate the introduction. And now I don't have my swag to hold up for the 20th anniversary, which if I'd been thinking about it, I would have brought the swag from the beginning of the India-China Institute. There's a whole collection of these that I have access to. And so this is New School math, by the way, in evidence, right? The India-China Institute is founded in 2004, but we're celebrating the 20th anniversary.
Academic year.
So the Tishman Center started its 20th year celebration last night from 2006. So this, I'm just letting you know that that there's some economists speaking tomorrow. I hope your numbers are more accurate than ours. I was thinking a lot last night. I was thinking about John Tishman. Today, I've been thinking a lot about Arjuna Padarai and Ben Lee because of the conversations that were happening at the New School when I arrived here. And indeed, I was incredibly honored to be involved with the India-China Institute in its very early years as an advisor, and through my years as the Dean of Parsons, I had the chance to travel often with India, China, and in fact was with Arjun in Mumbai in 2005 during the floods of that monsoon season that ended up killing about 1,000 people. And I was there to talk about climate change and resilience and the ways in which cities are either prepared or not prepared for these kind of profound altering events. And spent many then journeys in the future with Arjun and Ben and with the India-China Institute. I traveled with the first cohort to China in that first year, and recall to this day the really profound conversations, most of which seem to happen at around 2 or 3 in the morning, among the various different fellows across these 3 landscapes. And it was always interesting to me. The one thing I would have hoped the India-China Institute might have added into its title was the United States, because the conversations were always trilateral. And in some ways it may have been part of that initial kind of framing on how it is that India and China, new ways of thinking about India and China. Our biggest debates in those early years were about area studies and how they got it wrong. And I think back on that time and reflect on the moments that we're in, as you just pointed out, and it seems almost quaint, the challenges of the conversation and how critically important it is that the India-China Institute exists today, precisely because of the way the world has changed. But I do think we should be less surprised by it than perhaps we are. So 2004, for those of you who keep track of technology changes, it would be 3 years after 2004 when the first iPhone was introduced. So we think back over this period of time and the technologies that have transformed from 2004 to today, and the rapidity of those changes and the way those technologies have changed our conversations, our capacity to have conversations, right? When we start the India-China Institute, the ability to speak as easily across time and space, and the forms of media that made that possible, the pre-social media world in a lot of ways. All of these things set up the India-China Institute for a kind of pace of conversation that has accelerated in ways that make us look back on the 2004 founding and the goals and objectives and say, well, in some ways, this moment, this rupture that we are all very much, and by the way, being a university president today, if you're not feeling like you're in some kind of rupture of time and space, it's just, you try to kind of keep a calm ability to sort of reflect and lead a university and do all of that work, and just there's an assault on normalcy, on reason, on logic, and so in some ways I am trying very hard as I think back across these 20 years for the India-China Institute to not allow this rupture that we are in to be the thing that defines the trajectory. And this is what I mean by not being so surprised. Because if you take this story of being in Mumbai in 2005 and the accelerated implications of climate change, if you think about the speed of technological transformation, and if you think about, to some degree, the challenge, as we have been exploring in many of our symposia here, on the ways in which forms of government, particularly democracy in the conversations we've been having here, and by the way, democracy was really very much at the center of the discussions in the first urbanization and globalization cohort. The 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning conversations were all about democracy in the wake of, and we had colleagues who had been in leadership in Tiananmen, who were in conversation with Indian scholars talking about what democracy looks like in India and the issues around control within the radical challenge to control that this presented within these two contexts. And so as forms of government are really being challenged, as technology is advancing, as climate change is becoming and has been, for those of us who work in that space, a transformative issue for a very, very long time, in some ways this rupture in that context is not surprising. And I think one of the mistakes is to actually see it as the sort of unique evil genius of Donald Trump and MAGA. It is this kind of reactionary force to all of these changes that are going on in the world that we are struggling to figure out how to respond to engage with, to see ways forward. And these authoritarian and nationalistic and fragmented responses are not surprising in that context, at least from my perspective. And so when I say that the India-China Institute is so important today, it's because it provides a space for the kind of collaborative conversation, exchange, cultural exchange, ideas about a world that is going to continue to globalize regardless of what Donald Trump thinks might happen. And where these kind of quaint notions of returning to fossil fuels because we wish we could, those, he will screw stuff up in these next years on policy, but the transitions are happening. The technologies are breaking down boundaries in ways that we are still struggling with internally and transnationally. And so the kind of discussion that can happen in the India-China Institute feels to me like a way to begin or to continue to do the work, to be understanding a world that is so very much in transition that requires new ways of governing, new thoughts about peace building, about community, that is not bounded by these, either by area studies frameworks or even the kind of hopeful world that we were seeing, hopeful in quotes, world that we were seeing in 2004 when the Institute was started. And so it feels to me very much like, and it's interesting, Arjun had arrived at the new school in the fall of 2003. And Ben was shortly thereafter. And this is the first project. They kind of bring this project with them, to be honest. They've been talking about it for a while. And they were both new to the new school. New like as being here. Of course, the new school has a space and a place in the public imagination. But the project they put forward is so very new school, in my opinion. It really speaks to the traditions and the history of this place. And so I wish we could have said back then, wow, we know we're going to need it in 20 years. But it was established, and it was so carefully stewarded by Ashok Gurung. I want to make sure that at least I am mentioning some folks here. Ashok, who was appointed its first senior director and did that for 15 years. Grace who was appointed also at that time and is still here with us as deputy director now and has been a guiding light in India, China this whole time. both Mark and Manjari as co-directors, and Mark, you've been here for 13 years, and so you're newer to it. You're very
I'm
new.
the newbie.
You're the newbie. This is really deep in who we are as an institution. And so it's and by the way, I never could have imagined all those years ago when I was, talking with Ben and Arjun about this work, that I would be me standing here 20 years later, speaking on behalf of the institution for this institute. That's the truly most improbable part of the story. But I really want to thank Grace, Ashok, all of you who are doing the work to make sure that the new school is able to continue to support this effort. It was also some pretty wonderful funding at the beginning of the India-China Institute. We are gathered here in the STAR conference room, and it was the STAR Foundation that was the original funding for the India-China Institute. And of course, Luce and the Ford Foundation were critical partners in that process over the years. It was kind of like last night when I was doing the Tishman thing in Tishman Auditorium. And I don't know if you planned it this way, but it's kind of nice when we can connect these things. And so it's a project in continuous formation and growth, which is really the story of the new school. It is changing as an institute in order to meet the times that we are in. It's reflective and self-critical in that way. It learns. And so I'm looking forward to the next 20 years. I will not be the one standing here at that time, but the India-China Institute will be. So thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation over the next few days. Thanks.
It's 5:30. I'm Mark Fraser. I'm the co-director of the India-China Institute. I'm on the China desk. My great colleague Manjari, who has been wonderful to work with the last 6 years and more to come, it has been wonderful to work with. I just wanted to say a couple of things before I have the honor to chair the next panel. One is that before we started, you may have seen the scrolling photos that were being displayed, and one of those had a slide of a group of people in 2006 and 2024. Math isn't exactly lining up to 20, but this was the first cohort that Joel was referring to. Scholars, prominent public intellectuals like Yao Yang from China, from Peking University, Amita Bide from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Partha Mukhopadhyay from the Center for Policy Research in Delhi, all among that first cohort. And to meet them today, whether it's 15 years later or 20 years later, I haven't seen some of them in about 5 years, they reflect so deeply on the powerful influence that participating in that cohort it brought to them, brought to their thinking. They had never been to India or China, whatever the place they were coming from, and they really said that it was kind of transformative in how they thought about the research that they worked on in their own country. So what we did in 2024, exactly 20 years from 2004, in August of last year, we had a kind of a symposium like this, like we're having here tonight and tomorrow, featuring 3 cohorts of those fellows in Penang, and including some of our new school faculty who were also part of those cohorts. I see some of them here tonight. And this was as Manjari said, it was a way for people to reconnect and also reflect, as we're going to do tonight and tomorrow, about kind of how we got here 20 years later. So just to remind you, the symposium continues tomorrow in this room, Star Foundation Hall, 10 a.m., with the panel on deglobalization and a new international political economy, followed by 1:30 panel contesting history and memory, and then a concluding panel at 3:45 on India and China in the making of a post-liberal world. You can check your program in your seats for the further details, and my thanks to each of you I see in the audience who are joining us tomorrow as panelists. You will see that the event is being recorded. This is for our future use as a kind of educational resource. And finally, before we conclude this opening session, I want to recognize another 20th century milestone in a little deeper fashion than was just done, which is to say that Grace Ho, the Deputy Director of the India-China Institute, is marked her 20th anniversary last October, but this academic year. And I want her to ask her to stand, please, and let's congratulate her. Every organization has someone who says, well, I'm kind of the institutional memory, but there's just no doubt that you can ask Grace any question about any program in any year, and you'll know right away who did what and when and how. So I also will thank the team also, but Grace has managed a great team of student assistants to prepare this room, to prepare the panel for tonight and for tomorrow. So with thanks to Joel and Manjari, we are ready to have our first panel, and I'll invite our panelists to come forward, and we will bring the opening session to a close.